Arizona, homeowner's best friend.
You always make mistakes.
Yeah.
That's inevitable. Well, if you do it while you're volunteering, at least the mistake's not on your own property.
Yes, also true, and we are very highly tolerant of that. We got a great staff at the Queen Creek Botanical Gardens, very loving, caring staff that can compost any mistake that you might make, even for us at the Queen Creek Botanical Gardens. I mean, good example. We had a volunteer activity a couple weeks ago, and we had a couple things on the list. One of them was to be harvesting our melons from certain areas, and then to completely harvest the whole melon plant from one specific area. Well, that didn't get relayed to all the volunteers, so some of the melon plants that were still producing melons on a separate section, different microclimate, just barely starting to produce, those were also removed and composted. So we composted it, and I was like, oh, well, we weren't exactly planning to pull that section out. It was only this other section. And so those kind of mistakes can happen, especially as you start learning more about microclimates, knowing that there's overlapping seasons that can happen. I could have a succession planting of melons. So it's not like all the melons are out, because that's a traditional farming perspective. That's a traditional gardening perspective. It's like, I started my melons at this date, they harvested it this date, they all come out. But in a true agriscape, and in one that is mindful of the microclimates, it's not all the same date. We have succession areas. We got one area that's going to produce 4 weeks earlier of melons than another area. And so there's going to be a delay. So I might harvest that whole section out earlier and replant. But then the other area that's in a different microclimate, and that was the difference between what we call a C microclimate, mostly afternoon sun. That was the early producing melons. And then we had an A microclimate area that was just starting to ripen. And so it still had another 4 weeks to go before we would ever pulled any of that out. And so these are some of the nuances that are best learned in advance of practice. But if you're coming out and you're helping us out, we're going to help you kind of learn those things. And even our own staff sometimes haven't learned and practiced it as much. I mean, this is a science that, well, for all intents and purposes, only started on 2001. Started in 2001. And I continued to research my own garden as an engineer that I was training to be at the time. It's like we studied it, we practiced it for 9 years before I even started teaching it. And then from the teaching point, it's like it took till 2014 before we created a professional network of it and creating the contractors that can then come and help install it. And then we're still building, the training of our own internal staff. I mean, it takes time for these types of nuanced things to really be integrated completely so it becomes a true applied science. But we're not about theory, we're about practice. That's one of the key things. And so we are patient relative to practicing what we're studying. And we hope that you kind of have that same kindness and patience for yourself as you learn to integrate a process that, with hundreds of years of planting data, we now have a new way to look at it that's only, 24 years old, 23 years old. And it was brand new at the time.
Rosie on the house, every Arizona homeowner.